Using your mind to learn is one of the slowest forms of learning.
And exhausting.
And exhausting, yeah, often it is exhausting. Of course, your mind is a tool, just like all the other tools you have at your disposal. Your mind is one that needs to be engaged in order to learn. So your mind is a machine that is only able to respond to its inputs. There's also two parts of your mind. There's the instinctual part, which is your brain, the way it physically functions. And then there's your mind, which is what you do with your belief system based upon how your brain physically functions. So you've got your physical functioning of the brain, and then you've got your mind behind that brain, which is in your spirit body. And that mind, of course, functions a certain way too. And how are memories stored? We need to understand where they're stored, how they're stored. They're not even stored in your spirit body's mind or your physical body's brain. And that's why a person can destroy a part of their brain and recover their memories. Because their memories are not in their brain. They're not actually in their brain at all. They're in their soul. So there's connection points we need to understand between the three parts of the human, which we'll go into in a minute. But we do need to discuss how you go about finding truth. Because your brain, or you could say your intellect, is only a very limited tool to find truth. Yeah? You imagine if you just had a brain but you had no senses.
Oh. I'd be a computer.
That's right. You know how much truth do computers discover? Hardly any, right?
Yeah.
All they do is they get, and this is what they're doing lately, isn't it? They're getting all the information of the world that's already there through other means, and they're collecting it all together and calling it artificial intelligence. Right? But it fundamentally is a very flawed thing to do, is to get all the information available and then based upon that information make assumptions. That's very dangerous thing to do for us. You wouldn't want to do that if you were discovering truth. Right? So that's not the way your intellect, if it was removed from all of your senses, your intellect would be a very inefficient way of discovering truth, if you think about it. So yes, we need to look at ways to discover truth. Don't we? And your intellect is one way, but a very, very functionally limited way. Because if you removed, for example, the sensory apparatus that you have, your intellect would be operating in a vacuum of information. The only way it gets information is through the senses. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. So how does the intellect get information? It first has to have sensory inputs that it's measuring. So one of them is your hearing. It has to hear something to process it, right? It has to see something. So that's your eyesight. That's an important part of the sensory information that you need for your intellect to actually function. It has to touch something, usually. Or you could say feel something. Right? It has to taste something. Or smell something. Right? It's got to do things. It's got to have, you could say there's got to be devices connected to this brain. You understand? And this is a functional thing that a lot of people don't consider. But for your intellect to actually function, it needs all these sensory apparatus working for your intellect to function. And without that functioning, without this measurement, so if you had no eyesight, no hearing, no touch, no feelings, and if those were the only senses you had, which I must say they are not, but if they were, the brain would be in a vacuum. And so what can it do? It would be nothing. It couldn't understand anything. Right? So it needs things. So the intellect is a very inefficient thing by itself. It needs things. It needs senses. Firstly. So it needs the senses in order to function. Right? So you're not going to be able to find out truth just using your mind. You have to use your senses. You have to see things, hear things, touch things, taste things, smell things. At least that. to discover truths about the things. So an example of that, if I had an apple and I put the apple next to a brain but it wasn't connected to any senses. What can it tell me about the apple? Nothing at all. Nothing at all is the answer, right? It needs the sight, the sense of hearing, the sense of taste, the sense of touch, the sense of smell. It needs those senses in order to determine the truth about the apple. Does that make sense? So the intellect, while it can be used as a tool to discover truth, it's a very inefficient tool without other things working, without other senses working. The intellect itself in fact, the intellect itself would not even be a tool where it could even function. So it's sort of like any device that people make now, like in your car. You know, they're introducing self-driving cars, right? How does that work? Well, because the brain of the car has sensors. It has, optical sensors to measure distances all around the car. And as soon as you block those sensors, the car doesn't work.
Mine shuts down all the time.
That's right. All the new cars are very unreliable for that reason, aren't they? Because it just needs a sensor to fail, and bang, the whole brain fails and nothing works. So that's an example of the intelligence needing sensory apparatus to function, to determine the truth of a thing, right? It's the same with your body. So senses, your intellect, yes, is a way of determining truth, but a very inefficient way by itself. Once it's married to or joined to the senses, and those senses are functioning appropriately, they have to be working, now your intellect is able to process information that makes sense to it. So, and it's using the senses of in this case, just the body, you could say, but it's not just the body, we'll talk about that later, when we talk about how the human is made. But it's using these senses to assimilate information. So you need to use your senses to assimilate information, right? In the case of the human, there's other things, apparatus, you could call it, that you have that help you determine things. So emotion is another apparatus. Very powerful apparatus. In fact, you are far more governed by your emotions than you are by your intellect, if you think about your life. If you took away your emotions, what would your life feel like? It'd be weird, wouldn't it?
Bland.
Like if you think about it. The emotions are what makes your life happy or unhappy or painful or pleasurable, or, without them, how would you know or feel what's going on at any one point in time? You need the emotions. And the emotions don't belong to the mind and to the intellect. Right? So a little baby who has an undeveloped mind still has feelings. They cry when they're sad or distressed. They smile when they're happy. Right? They have feelings, but their mind's hardly processing any of it. Right? Their mind is not the determinator, you could say, the thing that determines their feelings. Right? The emotion does. Once you marry your emotions with your senses, that's where a lot of joy in life is. If you only marry your intellect with your senses, you can determine things, but the joy of life is missing. Right? Once the emotions are involved, now I can enjoy my life. Right? I can use my senses to the happiness of myself. So to improve my own happiness, right? So the emotional part of me is very, very important. But interestingly, it's not the only thing that drives me. There's another section of truth we need to understand, and that's sorting out our beliefs. Because they drive me to do the emotional thing. And to marry my senses with my emotions and to join all that together and enjoy it, and to enjoy life in that regard.
Is this a hierarchy going down again?
Exactly. In a lot of ways you can see, can't you? Minimum, extra, extra, extra. These are all ways to determine truths, right? So you could call these the senses. So I'll put all of this together and call that the senses that you could use to determine truths. But that's not the only way to determine the truth. But you need them to determine the truth, don't you? You need to have these things in order to determine truth. But it's not the only way to determine the truth, because you can experiment with things outside of yourself to determine truth. So in addition to these things, you need to experiment to determine truth. And that's using things outside of yourself and then using the senses that are inside of yourself in a harmonious manner to determine what the truth is about a thing. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's what an experiment is. You need to experiment.